Hi, my name's Natasha, this is Effie History, and can you guess what we're talking about today? Now, one of the earliest texts that we have on periods is actually from 79 AD and was written by a guy called Pliny the Elder. Now, Pliny was a philosopher and he was also the person that wrote one of the earliest prototypes for the encyclopedias that we have today. So a pretty well-rounded guy, and I am sure he knows what he's talking about when it comes to menstruation, right?
Nothing could easily be found that is more remarkable than the monthly flux of women. Contact with it turns new wine sour, crops touched by it become barren, grafts die, seeds in gardens are dried up, and the fruit of trees falls off.
Oh shit. But there's more.
Hives of bees die, even bronze and iron are at once seized by rust, and a horrible smell fills the air. To taste it drives dogs mad and infects their bites with an incurable poison.
So yeah, that's a lot. But Pliny had a plan, which was to put naked menstruating women into fields so that they would ward off any wildlife that would otherwise eat crops, which is an idea. Yeah. But luckily it wasn't all weird period human scarecrows. There were other things going on too, and in fact there were a lot of people that thought periods were a pretty great thing. 12th century abbess and leader of Germany's natural history movement, Hildegard of Bingen, advocated for using menstrual blood as a cure for leprosy. Meanwhile, Aristotle pointed out that periods were something that set women apart from men, similar to their lack of penises, beards, or inability to have nosebleeds. Aristotle believed that when a woman had her period, she was essentially getting rid of toxins from her body through bleeding them out, which in theory would be great for the woman, but would have some pretty major drawbacks if, say, you were a man and a woman who were looking to have some special alone time together. After all, if you're the man in this situation, you're going to be getting pretty up close and personal to what was thought to be poisonous blood. Not exactly a winner. In fact, according to Pliny the Elder, he believed that if you did this, you could die, but only if you did the deed under a full moon. And yet, by the medieval period, this weird werewolf vagina caveat situation had kind of been forgotten. For example, in the manuscript Women's Secrets, it says, "If you knowingly go with a menstruous woman, your whole body will be infected and greatly weakened. Do not go near a menstruating woman, because from this foulness the air is corrupted, and the insides of a man brought to disorder." Now, I know that this sounds like it's saying don't have sex, but it's really not, because people in the 13th and the 14th century loved themselves a bit of sex. So much so that some people actually thought being celibate might be deadly. No, this is about a fear of menstrual blood. So how come you have some people like Hildegard saying, wow, period blood's so amazing, it can cure disease, and some people saying, oh no, it will actually kill you, run? Well, it's because people's views differed on where they lived. It was very, very contradictory and it was very confusing. But there is one thing that we haven't talked about, one thing that ends up uniting the schools of thought on periods, and it is a very wonderful text. Now, just to get this out of the way, I am not saying that the Bible is in itself a verbatim historical text. No, what I am saying is that it was used in, well, gospel when it came to societal rules and governance throughout much of the West for a very, very long time. With that being said, let's talk Leviticus. Leviticus has a lot to say about periods, so here are some of the highlights. Whenever a woman has her menstrual period, she will be ceremonially unclean for 7 days. Anyone who touches her during that time will be unclean until evening. If you touch any object she has sat on, you must wash your clothes and bathe yourself in water, and you will remain unclean until evening. If a man has sexual intercourse with her and her blood touches him, her menstrual impurity will be transmitted to him. He will remain unclean for 7 days, and any bed on which he lies will also be unclean. And this stuck. By the 15th century, the introduction of the printing press meant that more people were reading Leviticus than ever before, along with the other texts that we've already talked about earlier. All this combined meant that periods were more demonized, and this stigma stuck for centuries. In the 19th century, people were still treating periods as some kind of terrifying other. In England, some female workers weren't allowed to churn butter during their periods. Meanwhile, in France, workers at a sugar factory weren't allowed to go on the shop floor during their period in case they turned the sweet stuff bitter. What I'm saying is that even though the centuries had rolled on, our understanding of periods was still not great.
There were theories that menstruation happened because there was too much blood in the body, and as women were the weaker sex, they needed to bleed more regularly, so this is how it got out.
Thankfully, this pretty much went out the window by the mid-19th century. However, understanding of periods was still really bad. It was thought that women on their periods were mentally unstable, which is kind of like that one guy who's like, oh yeah, she must be on the rag, but 500 times worse. In 1869, one man called James Mibbergat Allen spoke to the Anthropological Society of London and said,
although the duration of the menstrual period differs greatly according to race, temperament and health, it will be within the mark to state that women are unwell from this cause on the average of 2 days in the month, or say 1 month in the year. Such times women are unfit for any great mental or physical labour.
And this wasn't just some guy saying something dumb. People actually believed this. As Kate Lister points out in her paper, Menstrual Madness, between 1784 and 1794, over 80 women were admitted to just one London psychiatric hospital with conditions that had started after their monthlies. And in 1845, menstruation was actually used as a defence during a murder trial after 18-year-old nanny Martha Brixey killed a 9-month-old baby that had been in her care. She was acquitted under grounds of insanity because she was on her period at the time of the crime. Now, if you were hoping that by the time we get to the 20th century, things might be slightly less of a garbage fire, I'm sorry. In the 1920s, one Dr. Bela Schick published a medical article on something he called menotoxins. Schick believed that women emit a kind of invisible poison during their period called a menotoxin. Now, if you're thinking that this smacks of the kind of medieval BS that we talked about earlier, that's because it does. But Schick said that he had evidence. Admittedly, it was terrible evidence, but it was still evidence because he'd had a nurse who was on her period hold some flowers, and they wilted. And this wasn't just some kind of niche scoop-esque nonsense. This idea of menotoxins went pretty mainstream for a while there. Luckily, as the decades rolled on, more people started to want more than, well, anecdotal buffoonery when it came to their scientific evidence. And so Schick and his menotoxins kind of faded into the background. But when we think about it, the 1920s really isn't so far away from today. So how have we come so far in our belief on periods since then? In America and Europe alike, the role of women in the 20th century is massively different to what it was in any era before it.
There were more women workers than ever. Girls were expected to reach a better level of education, and on the whole, women's role in society was far more key.
And it's kind of hard to make that work when you're also obeying archaic rules around menstruation. After all, you can't exactly have half the population squirrel themselves away once a month because aunt Flo's here and therefore they're unclean. I mean, if nothing else, there's not exactly a viable workforce plan for any economy. Laura Friedenfeld really delves into this in her book, The Modern Period. But put simply, for women's new role in society to work, we had to reevaluate what we thought about periods.
The shift started in the late 19th century. First, the scientific look changed. More research was done and a better understanding of periods created. Then there were books like 1929's Marjorie May's 12th Birthday, which helped parents explain to their daughters what periods were.
And then, of course, there was the commercialization of periods, which really changed the whole ballgame. Cue the montage. These adverts not only helped explain periods to the public at large, but they also developed a language with which to talk about menstruation. And it's the one that we still use today. The emphasis is on hygiene, thus feminine hygiene. It's keeping things clean, medical and sterile, avoiding using the word period at all, and definitely not talking about blood.
Always Ultra, unlike the fluff-filled pad, has liquid locking gel.
So there you have it, a whistle-stop tour on the history of periods. Now, if you'd like to know more about the subject, because we really have only just scratched the surface, please look in the description box below, because I have linked to some amazing papers and articles on it, and you can find out so much more. Seriously, it's so interesting. If you'd like to hear more from us, please do remember to like, subscribe, and visit our website, fbahistory.com, and do let me know if there's anything else you'd like to see us cover in these videos. I'm always open to suggestions, and I love to hear your thoughts. Okay,